Merhabalar arkadaşlarım. So I think this is the last section of my library that is politics and history. I have a problem with my politics and history section, and you might see it in this video, where since it's one of the lower shelves of my bookshelf, I am willing to interchange books there or just lay books on the ledge because it's easier and more accessible, and so as a result there might be some overlap in some of these politics and history videos. But with that being said, let's start. So the first book is Turkey de-Europeanizing? It's an interesting debate. A lot of people actually, when you ask this question, are kind of taken aback by it. And this book argues that Turkey is becoming less European. Perhaps maybe it's dependent on the region, but it's an interesting book. It's worth a read. Oil and world politics, the real story of today's conflict zones, Iraq, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Ukraine, and more. I mean, it's a good book. Kind of just gives you like the takes about these regions that you wouldn't get from mainstream media. About like why there actually is conflict in some of these regions and why there's contention. The New Geopolitics of Natural Gas. I have not read this yet, but given with the rapid advancements in nuclear energy, you should probably read this before it becomes too out of date. Abdullah Gül, The Making of a New Turkey. This is a famous politician in Turkey, and I saw that he had a book, so I decided to get it. I haven't read it yet, but I'll see what he has to say. The Turks Today, Andrew Mango. Mango has a lot of good books. If you haven't read any of Andrew Mango's books yet, I strongly recommend it. This book gives a lot of good takes on Turkey today, and a lot of the claims that are made against Turkey aren't actually completely accurate, because if you're someone outside of Turkey, you might want to talk about Turkey as a whole, but anybody who actually has like a sophisticated opinion on Turkey realizes that Turkey is actually, there's differences between like an Istanbul Turk and, let's say, I don't know, an Anatolian Turk, okay? There are differences that need to be accounted for. You can't like oversimplify, I guess. Modern Turkey. I read this book when I was first getting into Turkey, and it's a good overview. I think it is out of date now, but it's a good overview. National Security, Its Theory and Practice. I think this is actually a famous national security book. I haven't read it yet, but national security is an interesting subject, so I figured I would get the book. This is an old book from my university days, Structures and Processes of Government. I believe this is actually just about Canadian government. Very old book. Won't be useful to anybody who's not Canadian. The Future is Asian. This book kind of argues that the developing Asian countries are going to peak pretty soon, and that as a result, I don't know, economic power is going to reside in Asia. That's kind of what it is. The Middle East and the United States, History, Politics, and Ideologies. This is just like an international relations book with a centric view on like America and different states in the Middle East. Noam Chomsky, Interventions. I haven't read this yet, but Chomsky has a lot of interesting takes. You might not agree with him on a lot of things. Like, I think his take on nuclear power is a bit questionable, but yeah, I haven't read that one yet, so maybe it'll be good. The Empire and the Five Kings. This is one of these books that argues basically we want America to be the world's police because the alternatives are terrible. So he's like saying China and Russia, we don't want China and Russia to be the world police. We want America to be the world police. And he even actually makes arguments that when you see America pulling out of certain areas in the world, that chaos increases. This is definitely the case in Afghanistan, where if America pulled out, there was a lot of chaos. Syria. This is basically a little book about Syrian history by a journalist. It goes over what led up to the Civil War, and even some of the modern takes since the Civil War. This is a good book. I read it maybe 5 or 6 months ago. The most interesting fact in this book was that I think the journalist talked about nine different countries have funded militias in Syria. So that's interesting. Crescent and Star, Turkey Between Two Worlds. This is a great book. I love this book. Apparently the author of this book made it a point to swim across the Bosphorus. He's like a Turkophile. Yeah, I like this book. It has a lot of nuanced takes again on Turkey. A lot of people who don't study Turkish politics don't realize that it's you can't speak about the country as a whole. There's a lot of diversity, and you need a more nuanced take, which that author had. The Pursuit of Power, Europe, 1815-1914. I haven't read this book yet, but I'm going to collect a bunch of books on European history because I haven't gone through it. I'm still going through Roman history and Ottoman history, but the next I will do is European history, and so I'm collecting a bunch of books on European history. I haven't read this one yet. Beyond Regimes, China and India Compared. I do want to do an Asia, kind of modern Asian history study, but also I want to compare some of the emerging powers in Asia. So I guess India and China would be a good comparison. Japan, obviously, I also want to study, which you'll see coming up. I haven't read this book yet, but a lot of people recommended this book to me, so. The Routledge Handbook of Nuclear Proliferation Policy. I love that this photo is on the front. I haven't read this yet, but I got this book called Chernobyl, and then I got another book about managing nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And I figured this would be a good complement to read alongside those two books. And so I'll read that book with this book. Or read those books with that book, I should say. Policy Paradox, The Art of Political Decision Making. I believe this was a gift. Somebody saw me with a bunch of, diplomacy books and decided that this would be a good gift for me. I haven't actually read it yet because I just haven't gotten to it. I have a lot of books in my reading list as of now. This is another gift, Indispensable When Leaders Really Matter. I believe I was talking about leadership with somebody, and they got the idea that this would be a good gift for me. Who are some of the leaders in here? Will it tell me? Lincoln, okay. Chamberlain, Churchill. Okay, yeah, it seems like it's Western-centric, but it's fine. Secular and Islamic Politics in Turkey. I haven't read this yet. I believe it's just like a book covering the AK Party. Going over that. I haven't read it yet, though. War, What is it good for? Conflict and the Progress of Civilization from Primates to Robots. I think I just got this book because I was in the bookstore. I know nothing about it, but the title caught me. And therefore I want to read it. It's an interesting question. American Diplomacy. This is like a pretty basic book if you want to understand how Americans do diplomacy. Besides like the traditional meme of, like Americans just export democracy and set up puppet governments. I mean, there's more to it than that, right? If you actually want to have a sophisticated, educated, take that has a lot of nuance and understands what actually is American diplomacy, I'd read this book. If you want the meme takes, then just keep saying America exports democracy. The Economic Diplomacy, Decision-Making and Negotiations in International Economic Relations. This is basically a soft power book, just how soft power is used for negotiations. That's about it. NGOs, stuff like that. Understanding International Diplomacy, Theory and Practice. Very basic overview of what's going on. Examples of up-to-date stuff. I would say it's worth a read if you want to get into the field. Nationalism and Politics in Turkey. I haven't read this one yet, but I'm sure it's going to be good. I'm sure it'll give decent takes on some of the issues in that area. America and the Making of Modern Turkey, Science, Culture, and Political Alliances. In case anybody hasn't known, I'm really into Turkish politics and Turkish history and learned the language, or in learning the language, I should say. And that's why I have so many books in Turkish politics. I also have a lot of books on Russian politics, but not as many as Turkish politics. I haven't read this one yet, but basically the idea is that America was responsible for a lot of the modern development of Turkey. Like, for example, with the universities, setting up of universities, setting up of certain industries in Turkey, the car industry, are very much comparable to the American versions. Turkish-Russian relations, competition and cooperation in Eurasia. This is actually an important issue. I haven't read this book yet, but because Turkey's foreign policy is all about playing the double-edged sword kind of thing, where you barter with America and Russia, even to some extent China, to avoid having too much control over your country from one or the other. That's kind of what they do. Dogs and Demons, The Fall of Modern Japan. I believe this is a modern history of Japan. I haven't read it yet. I was basically looking for a bunch of modern history books on Japan because I do want to learn Japanese and I do want to learn about Japanese culture and history, so get some modern history books in Japan. Here's another one, Modern History by James L. McLean. This one's a bit more systematic. It's much bigger. I think this one's actually by like a historian. The other one, I'm not sure if it's by a historian. Another one, Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II. Another modern history book of Japan. This will be fun to read. I haven't read it yet. And then there's something I always do, which is I get Routledge handbooks to study countries. The Routledge Handbook of Japanese Politics. These books are usually more systematic. One of the critiques of this book was that it's out of date, but it's still like a good modern history book. So social and public policy, political economy and policy making, international relations and security, civil society. It goes over all the important areas that you want to understand for a country, like domestic politics, right? So if you're ever going to study a country, I couldn't recommend more getting these books. So those are, I think, the last shelf for my politics and history books. I don't think there'll be another one. And with that being said, cheers.